Blackface for supporting PBS.
All right, you've been lied to about DNA evidence. Let's check this out.
I immediately think, oh my God, I'm being framed. This is impossible. I cannot explain how this could be. Meredith's DNA should not be on the knife that was found at my boyfriend's house.
Oh my God, chat. Being framed would be one of the worst feelings ever. Imagine everybody thinks you killed somebody. The police arrest you for killing somebody and you don't know nothing about nothing. Like, you didn't do shit. You didn't do anything. And everybody is, of course, going to be like, they're going to look at you sideways. Because when somebody gets arrested for a murder, you're like, well, I mean, they probably did it, right? Otherwise, why would they arrest them? Like, and then they'll probably start presenting the evidence on the news. Like, yeah, his blood was found on the knife. His fingerprints were on the knife that was used to kill that person. He was in the general vicinity. Everything leads to him doing it. So everybody's going to be like, well, I mean, that's kind of all I need to think, that you murdered that person. I'm not going to really believe you. And even after you go through the process of proving your innocence, all the damage is pretty much done. Most of the damage is pretty much done. You probably already lost your job. You know, you probably alienated your friends and family. Like, everybody's looking at you sideways no matter what.
Amanda Knox spent 4 years in prison for a murder that she didn't commit. The media circus was honestly pretty insane, all because some tiny invisible molecules seemed to say that she did it.
Her pleas fell on deaf ears. Amanda Knox is now a convicted killer.
Amanda Knox sounds like the name of like a horror movie, like Amanda Knox or something. Like, never mind. I'm stupid. Don't listen to me.
A lot of magical claims were made about how if you find DNA, that it's unquestionable and it definitively proves guilt.
Forensic DNA technologies become so sensitive that today a single cell's worth of genetic material can be detected at a crime scene and identified to solve that crime.
Oh my God. Oh my God. So like, there's got to be DNA all over the place of people. Like, if you go outside and like touch something, you're probably picking up somebody's DNA and then you bring that somewhere. Like, if I order like coffee or something like that and give somebody my money that I've touched and they take that money and then go kill somebody, my DNA is probably going to be on whatever weapon they used to kill somebody. I might be talking out of my ass right now, but I'm sure that's possible, at least for like a certain window of time.
How it's supposed to work. But
just because there's DNA doesn't mean we know what happened.
what happens if we push that science beyond its limits? What happens when police start chasing ghosts? Hey smart people, Joe here. Forensic DNA technology has totally revolutionized criminal investigation. We have the ability to collect, process, and identify invisible, beyond microscopic molecules that are left behind at crime scenes, which is honestly mind-blowing. We're all probably somewhat aware of what DNA forensics is, and for many people, I'm betting that's thanks to TV. Shows like CSI created this perception. Researchers literally call it the CSI effect, where the public, and more importantly, people on juries, came to see DNA evidence as basically magic. Swab a crime scene, run it through a computer, and boom, you got your killer. Juries kind of tend to treat DNA as infallible proof rather than one piece of a much messier puzzle.
That DNA doesn't lie.
I think it's important and pretty interesting to learn how DNA forensics actually works.
DNA doesn't lie, but there could be multiple reasons why DNA is at a given location. And like, yeah, just like what he said, it doesn't tell the full picture. And definitely, I feel like even I have fallen victim to like, well, if the DNA is there, then I mean, it might like, I mean, why else would they be testing for the DNA? but I don't know.
And as we're about to see, it isn't always as infallible as we've been told. I guess this is a true crime show today.
I guess
On a
so.
sunny spring day in 2007, two German police officers were taking a break in their car. They had the doors open. It was a really nice day. But moments later, they were both shot in the head from behind. One officer, 22-year-old Michel Kiesewetter, didn't survive. Investigators diligently swabbed the scene to collect any trace of
Whoa, what's that haircut on his laptop right there? What's that haircut on? That's criminal. That's criminal right now, right there. Where's the DNA evidence for that?
of the killer's DNA. And they got a hit. To their shock,
Where's the
it
DNA
matched
evidence
DNA
for his
from
barber?
multiple other crime scenes. This suspect's DNA was connected to drug deals, burglaries, and assaults in multiple countries across Europe, in addition to a half-dozen other murders. A serial killer and super criminal was haunting Europe. The strangest part? All the DNA evidence pointed to the fact that the killer was a she, despite the fact that only 1 in 6 serial killers are thought to be women. She was tied to several different accomplices, none of whom would give her up to police. Authorities figured they were all just too scared of her to snitch. Police eventually linked her DNA to 40 different crime scenes across Europe, going back to 1993. She was dubbed the Phantom of Heilbronn because no one ever saw her commit these crimes, but her DNA was everywhere. Well, fast forward to April 2008. As evidence is piling up, investigators announce we're closing in on her. Except there was no her to close in on because the killer that they were chasing wasn't real. Everything started to fall apart when the Phantom's DNA showed up in a French case involving a burned body. Now, the police had a hunch that the body belonged to a man who'd gone missing. Now, this person had entered the country seeking asylum, so investigators had his fingerprints on that asylum application. But when they swabbed those fingerprints from his asylum application to serve as a reference to ID the burned body, the Phantom's DNA turned up in that sample. Female DNA. This didn't make any sense. The swab of DNA wasn't even from
What's
a
going
crime
on
scene,
here?
and it should have only contained male DNA. A horrifying realization began to hit the investigators. They had indeed been hunting a phantom, but that phantom was DNA contamination.
So the DNA's strength, like all of our strengths, is also its weakness.
That's Dr.
Wait, wait. So how does DNA get contaminated and turn you into a female? Like, wait. Is it the cops that are the people who are testing the DNA, like getting their DNA onto the DNA and the testing it? Is that what's going on here?
Greg Hampikian, a forensic DNA expert.
I've gotten DNA out of, 400-year-old mummy bones. It's very persistent. If it's taken care of, it lasts quite well, even at room temperature. Every year and every
We could clone
round,
some mummies
there are
right now.
contamination events.
In the Phantom's cases, the contamination turned out to be from the cotton swabs used to collect samples at the crime scenes. Those swabs had come from a factory in Bavaria, where they'd been contaminated with DNA from a woman who worked there at the factory. Her DNA matched the Phantom profile at all of those crime scenes. A few stray molecules had led police on a wild goose chase across Europe for years.
It's very easy to
Sorry, I wasn't even paying attention. My bad.
Should have on that entered the country. Now, the police had to ID from a hunting.
is also its weakness.
That's Dr. Greg Hampikian, a forensic DNA expert.
I've gotten DNA out of, 400-year-old mummy bones. It's very persistent if it's taken care of.
Yo, the thing about cloning humans, it's not as interesting as like cloning a extinct animal or something. Like if we were to clone this mummy right now, even though we had the DNA, it would just be another person, but you're not like bringing a species back together. But as a kid, I swear I thought like cloning somebody could literally instill your consciousness into that other person. Like you could have two identical people who stemmed from the same like thoughts and memories and brain function, but really it's just like a identical twin pretty much.
It lasts quite well, even at room temperature. Every year in every lab, there are contamination events.
In the Phantom's cases, the contamination turned out to be from the cotton swabs used to collect samples at the crime scenes. Those swabs had come from a factory in Bavaria, where they'd been contaminated with DNA from a woman.
Oh,
who
they
worked
came from
there
the
at
factory.
Her DNA matched the Phantom.
Wow. Imagine messing up that bad that you contaminate the material used and sent to the police station to solve the crime. If she had DNA on file, they would think that you were the actual killer, but they could probably figure out pretty quickly that, yeah, you're actually working at the plant and you're sending it to the police station. So you're probably not involved in that way. There's probably contamination.
Profile at all of those crime scenes. A few stray molecules had led police on a wild goose chase across Europe for years.
It's very easy to move DNA, and we should never confuse identification information, which is who is the ultimate source of this, with questions about activity. How did the DNA get here?
Of course, I had to ask Amanda what she thought of this case.
She's like, what? I just make cotton. I mean, what incredible story to talk about how like narratives form and like completely take over the public imagination, and they have a completely different explanation. Like, wow.
Instead of just
Yeah, I swear that people love to think that they have the right idea of what's going on in every situation, like that their opinion and that their like story for something is the correct one. Like people will jump to conclusions so quickly, and like you can tell that like I'm doing that in this video real time. Like as he's giving me information, I'm like trying to predict what's going on, and it'd be like, oh, it must be like the cops are doing this and doing that and doing that. And like, if you extrapolate to that to like actual murder cases and things with high stakes, like every human is jumping to conclusions, trying to like think that they have the right answer, and they live their life based on that story that they've created in their head. And it's so hard for us to just like step back and say like, I don't have all the answers. I'm not even going to try to like figure this out myself. This is not my line of work, and my opinion should not be interjected into like what type of person this suspect is based on the little information I have. Like, and even in court, it's like innocent until proven guilty. But I swear to God, we don't abide by that as much as we should at all. Like we view suspects, and like if you're a plaintiff, you're viewing that person as if they're guilty no matter what, and you're trying your darndest to prove that person as being guilty whether or not they are.
Focusing on the identity, which is the only thing that DNA can actually tell you, the police made up a story about activity, about what had happened, what happened to get the DNA there. This was the fatal flaw of the Phantom of Heilbronn investigation. They invented a serial killer, and that supposedly magical DNA evidence wasn't so magical here. To understand how a cotton swab fooled the entire German police force, we need to understand what forensic DNA analysis actually is, and why it's both incredibly powerful and incredibly fragile. So, how's it supposed to work? Let's solve a murder, shall we?
Let's do it.
This kitchen knife was collected at a crime scene, and it's believed to be the murder weapon. To catch the killer, we've swabbed the knife, hoping that the murderer left behind some traces of bodily materials, like skin cells, hair, blood, or semen, because all of those contain
Semen
DNA.
on the knife?
Importantly, we also
We're
have a
getting
swab
freaky.
from the victim to make sure that any DNA that we find isn't just the dead person's DNA. A DNA from a single skin cell contains a person's entire genome. That's billions of DNA letters of their full genetic blueprint. But investigators today don't usually read all of that DNA to get an ID. Sequencing whole genomes is getting mind-blowingly cheap, and maybe how forensic DNA testing is done in the future. But today, we're gonna use a different cool trick to read a genetic fingerprint that is currently the gold standard in forensics. Our genome has thousands of genes that carry instructions for making stuff that keeps us alive. But the vast majority of our DNA does not make stuff. And in those giant in-between regions, there are these short little stretches where DNA sequences repeat back to back. They're called short tandem repeats, or STRs. We have lots of different STRs throughout our genome, and each STR can vary in how many repeats it contains. Sequencing just 20 of them can create a DNA profile that can identify one unique individual. To show you what I mean, let's take a look at the DNA profile of our victim.
So that's interesting. So you're not actually looking at the information that decides who they are as a person, but that information and the spacing in between that information still points to who that person is and is unique to that person. So it's not doing anything, but it still can identify a person. That's interesting.
The first STR spot, the little DNA repeating sequence, is AGAT. The victim has one allele or version of the STR with 5 repeats, and another allele with 9 repeats. That's because STRs are something that we inherit from mom and dad, just like all of our other DNA sequences. So it's possible to have 2 different alleles for any STR sequence.
They say allele in Italian, sorry, alleles in English.
The second STR spot consists of repeating TCATs. Our victim only has an allele for 12 repeats at this STR, because they inherited the same one, 12 repeats from both parents, mom and dad. The third STR spot consists of repeating ATTs, and our victim has alleles for 8 and 10 repeats. We do this on and on up to the 20 STRs that make up a full genetic profile. These 20 STRs are standard across forensic investigations, and they form the basis of something called CODIS, the massive DNA database maintained by the FBI. All of the cells in the victim's body have their unique combination of STR repeats, except their eggs or sperm, which only have half of.
Wait, so why are we doing this instead of like looking at their entire genome? I'm assuming, is this like a cheaper way? Is that what he's talking about? Is like, this is the cheapest way to find a person, to find somebody's DNA? It also seems like the least invasive way to look at somebody's DNA, because it's not actually the makeup of who they are. Like, you couldn't clone the person. Not that that's like a huge danger I'm worried about, but you couldn't like do anything really nefarious with this information
of them. But the most important thing, the thing that makes forensic DNA identification possible, is that the victim has a different combination of STR repeats than the murderer does. And not just that, they have a different DNA profile than any other person does. Check this out. So 2 people may share the same number of repeats at 1 STR, maybe even 2. But
yeah, so like if they're saying there's 20 alleles, then there'd be 20 combination, or sorry, there'd be 20 factorial combinations of like possible combinations. So what's 20 factorial? What's 20 factorial? Yeah, that's a really large number. That's a really large number. 2.4 basically to the power of 18. 2.4 e to the power of 18. That's a lot.
across all 20
way more
STR
people
sites,
that are on planet
there is
Earth.
less than a 1 in a trillion chance that they have all of
There
the
we go.
same
That's probably a
repeats
better
at
way to say it.
all of the same spots, unless they're identical twins. Those are pretty good odds that any DNA fingerprint is totally unique. So let's go back to our murder weapon. The swabs will have picked up DNA from our victim, and now that we have the STR profile from our victim, we can easily separate it from any other STRs that we may find in the mix. Any other DNA profiles we find, it might be the murderer. We can then run those STR profiles against those of any suspects to see if there's a match, or run it through CODIS to search for matches from this giant database of criminals and other crime scenes. And we found another DNA profile that matches someone near the case. So does that mean it's our murderer? Well, not so fast. First, I need to tell you about Lucas Anderson.
56.
Yeah, because if you're looking for DNA matches for somebody near the case, like if you're a murderer and you've planned it out, you probably don't want to be in the area that you're going to do the murder in. Either you're going to like drive to the area or something, or you're going to like flee the scene. And in either case, you don't want to be around the area. And there's not like 100% chance. Like, yeah, people do probably commit most murders like within their area. But there's definitely the option that that could not have been the case, and that you're just like pinning it on somebody who has nothing to do with it.
100 miles away from Heilbronn in Santa Clara County, California, Lucas Anderson was having
100 miles is a lot.
In December 2012, his DNA was found in a sample taken from under the fingernails of a wealthy California investor who'd been tied up and killed during a home break-in. Lucas's name popped up as the match to that DNA because he was in the database due to his past criminal record. He also had memory problems from an old head injury, and he routinely blacked out due to alcoholism. So he honestly couldn't say for sure that he was innocent. To the prosecutors, this looked like an open and shut case. The DNA analysis...
That's awful, yeah, because you know that people are going to look at this guy, and then if he has like mental health issues, they're going to look at this guy and see his mental health issues and say like, oh yeah, I mean, this guy probably robbed that white dude, and this guy probably, you know, yeah, obviously his mental issues like made him do it. And there's very little attempt to even try to figure out what actually happened in a lot of these cases, where I feel like they're just like trying to make a case no matter what. And if they can't actually find the right person, they're going to like, their minds are going to have such a bias of pinning it on what little evidence they do have.
He was innocent. To the prosecutors, this looked like an open and shut case. The DNA analysis worked as it should. It provided an unambiguous match to a known criminal, and there was plenty of circumstantial evidence to write a story of what happened that night. Lucas was sent to jail on a murder charge, which could carry the death penalty. But as his lawyers combed through evidence trying to save him from death row, they
Death
found something
penalty in
pretty
California?
important. The night of the murder,
didn't know he had
Lucas
that.
had been in the hospital for alcohol intoxication after collapsing at a store. So how could his DNA be at the scene of the crime when he was in a hospital bed miles away? His defense team interviewed the paramedics who picked him up, and it turned out that they were the same paramedics who responded to the 911 call at the scene of the murder. And they had processed the victim's body.
Human DNA can transfer as a solid, as a liquid, or as an aerosol.
Lucas's case was one of
Surprisingly
DNA
stable.
transference. Tiny traces of DNA had traveled from Lucas to the paramedics to the victim. But because our scientific technology is so sensitive, that was more than enough to yield a positive match to Lucas. We don't know for sure, but his DNA may have hitched.
And that's the thing, is the database for DNA that you already have is going to be like people who are mostly criminals. So you're already going to have that bias of like, oh, these people are criminals. They've already committed crimes in the past. So what is to say that they didn't commit this crime?
To ride on a pulse oximeter, you know, those little things they put on your finger that the medics had used on both men.
We call it activity level proposition. Can you tell when it's directly by a hand? No, there's no way to tell. And but there are people in my field who will testify that way, and I think it's shocking and fraudulent.
When do people stop asking, is there an innocent explanation for this DNA? Are we taking shortcuts to automatically assume the guilt of the DNA and not asking that question?
Thankfully, Lucas was eventually freed, but only after he spent 5 months in jail. The prosecutors weren't the ones asking the questions. The science did exactly what it was supposed to. Lucas's DNA genuinely was there. And that was enough for them to construct a narrative about what that DNA meant. A narrative that could have sent an innocent man to death row. And this is nothing compared to what happened with Amanda Knox.
20-year-old Amanda was studying abroad in Perugia, Italy in the fall of 2007. She was living with her roommate, Meredith Kircher. She just started dating a local student named Rafael Solicito.
Didn't they make like a
On November
Netflix
2nd,
documentary?
the unthinkable happened. Meredith's body was found in her bedroom of their shared apartment. She'd been sexually assaulted and brutally murdered with a knife. Now, the DNA and fingerprints of a man named Rudy Guede were found all over the crime scene. He had fled to Germany, he was arrested and ultimately charged with the murder. But during the investigation, Amanda was subjected to an endless series of harsh interrogations, ultimately resulting in a coerced confession. Amanda and her boyfriend were arrested and also charged with Meredith's murder.
It affected the way DNA was then processed afterwards. So the arrests came before the DNA came. I think it took 2 or 3 weeks for the DNA that they collected at the crime scene to be processed. And by that time, they already had arrests. They had already announced to the world that the case was closed.
Yo, so they were trying to find her DNA. So they already like arrested her in the hopes that they would get the DNA to sort of like try to prove that she was responsible for it, which is kind of messed up because like you're starting from the point of assuming guilt.
They already had a narrative about what had happened to my roommate, which turned out to be very, very wrong. I'm a 20-year-old kid who believes that when the actual evidence is processed at the crime scene, it will reveal the truth, that I had nothing to do with this crime,
Yeah.
and that I'll be released and let go.
That's the most natural, like most innocent way to feel. Like if you're just a regular person who's been framed, you might think like, okay, I'm just gonna like tell the truth. I'm just gonna do what the cops say because I'm innocent and none of this is gonna matter. But in reality, no, they're trying to pin it on you. They're trying to pin it on you no matter what, and they don't care necessarily whether you're innocent or not. Like they are going to try to get a confession out of you.
But that's not what happened. Investigators found a torn-off bra clasp from Meredith's room and a kitchen knife in Rafael's apartment. Forensic analysis identified Rafael's DNA on the bra clasp and Amanda's DNA on the knife handle and Meredith's DNA on the knife blade. Amanda was convicted of murder and sentenced to 26 years in prison, thanks in large part to this supposedly slam dunk DNA evidence. I mean, her DNA on a knife handle, a victim killed with a knife. What else could that mean? Well, as we've seen, DNA evidence isn't always as clear and unambiguous as TV would lead you to believe.
You have DNA experts at war with each other who are each claiming to have authority over the truth. It was just incredibly frustrating for me to have to sit there and listen to people construct a reality out of whole cloth.
That's the thing is like when you're in court, you can only speak when you're allowed to speak. You're not going to be able to talk as much as you maybe want to talk to really flesh out your side of the story. Like everything is controlled by the people around you, by the lawyers and by the judge. You don't really get to have your piece, and like there may be other witnesses who have their version of the story, but really like you have the most information out of anybody in that room. You and like the defendant if they're there, but obviously the defendant is dead, or like the victim is dead. So yeah, that must be so frustrating, and let alone being in another country where she may not speak Italian that well enough to understand. Like she's only 20 and she's studying abroad. I'm assuming that she's not perfectly fluent in Italian, but yet she has to listen to this case in probably Italian. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's in English, but still.
All for the sake of the narrative
4 years passed before the court agreed to hear Amanda and Raphael's appeal and re-examine the evidence with a panel of independent
4
forensic
years?
experts.
Our crime scene was processed by forensic experts twice, once in the immediacy of the crime being discovered, but then after those samples had been processed and none of it implicated me or my boyfriend or anybody in the crime, they went back in 46 days later to try to find new forensic evidence to implicate us in the crime. And they have completely upended our house and contaminated it completely.
The only piece of DNA evidence tying Raphael to the crime was found in that problematic second sweep, after evidence had been mixed and thrown around, all but guaranteeing that the evidence would be contaminated. Oh, and the knife?
I did a little work on Amanda Knox's case.
I love Greg. He's the best.
Yeah, this
really,
guy
it was
seems
just
nice.
that
He
knife
seems wholesome.
For Amanda, a single cell can make it look like a suspect was on a piece of evidence. When we saw the electropherograms, it was clear to us that the DNA was at such a low level. How are the Italians looking way below anything I do in my research lab?
The trace of DNA that is on it is so minuscule that it can't be attributed to anyone.
I knew right away this was suspicious. The guidelines say you need to separate evidence and reference samples. You do all of the evidence first. When the evidence is finally processed, you bring the reference samples in the lab. You never bring them into the lab before that.
Reports indicated that the knife blade samples were processed in the middle of 50 samples of reference material from Meredith. Traces of her DNA could have easily contaminated the knife blade samples. And considering that modern forensic DNA technology is so sensitive it can pick up on just a few cells worth of DNA, not following careful contamination procedures is incredibly risky.
And also it's her roommate. Like, she lived with her. Of course there's going to be DNA in the room. Of course there's going to be contamination of her DNA in the room. Like, how is that even a question?
It was another case of confirmation bias. Investigators had constructed a grisly narrative of this crime and pushed the science well beyond its safe limits until
they're getting
found
terrible
data
pictures of her
that
too.
agreed with their conclusions. This is the opposite of good science.
The independent experts
Hey,
found
what's
the
up,
exact
Crosshair?
same
What's going
findings
on?
that my defense team found.
We showed in the end it was probably transfer contamination and not the result of a criminal act.
I'm doing good,
That
man.
took 4 years of Amanda being in prison to convince the Supreme Court in Italy.
I'm really interested to see a world in which the forensic evidence comes so quickly that it can be the thing that guides the narrative construction as opposed to the thing that tries to justify an already established narrative.
Yeah.
In a world like the one Amanda describes,
They got it all
with
messed
faster,
up.
better forensic science, how many other people would never have been arrested for those?
There's an Easter event at the moment. Oh, that's cool. I guess it is Easter. It's not even Easter yet for me. I got 8 more minutes. 8 more minutes.
Crimes they didn't commit.
Anytime you introduce a new process, you introduce a new field of error. That's always going to be true, no matter how good the instrument is, no matter how good the training is.
Because science is evolving at a rapid pace, especially science around DNA, it's so important that we open up opportunities to appeal decisions that were based on bad science in the past.
There's a
Yeah, I feel like cases are closed way too quickly. And like the ability to appeal is way too hard. I don't know. I feel like just the court system in general, definitely in the U.S., I'm sure, obviously in Italy, and I'm sure in just most countries around the world, they don't have an open mind enough about whether or not the person is actually innocent. It's innocent before proven guilty, and that is never usually held to the standard it should be.
couple of states that have passed laws that say if the science you were convicted by has now been superseded by better science that corrects the old view, you have a right to retest evidence. Most states don't have that law.
Oh,
and so
geez,
innocent
yeah.
people are sitting behind bars with no legal avenue for proving their innocence.
How many
It's kind of like when like like in California, there's a lot of people who went to prison for weed, and even after it was legalized, they were still in prison for weed. And like even in states where it was decriminalized, the same thing would happen. Like if a law changes, you should be released. Like if that's the reason you're in prison, you should be released if it's no longer illegal.
people have been convicted with sloppy DNA? How many times has that happened? I'll bet it's happened a lot of times.
The beauty of science is that it recognizes that it has its own limitations, it's an evolving practice, and it's willing to revisit and reevaluate certain calculations. The problem is that legal systems are not designed like that. And I think that the legal system would do well to take on a more scientific mindset of it is possible that we got this wrong.
We could all use a little more scientific mindset. Something that kept coming up in these conversations and cases was how often humans fall victim to constructing stories and then looking for evidence that supports those stories, rather than following the evidence and building the story based only on what can be proven. This is what science demands, right? With technology that's now sensitive enough to get a DNA profile from a single cell, it's more important than ever to avoid weaving elaborate stories from a molecule like DNA.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of people view science as having an agenda, but in reality, science is literally having no agenda and just the ability to discover truth based on like methodical practices and that are objective and can't be and try as hard as possible to be uninfluenced by subjective impulse. Like if your own emotion and your own personal opinion and theories are affecting the actual process of figuring out the truth, I think that is a bad thing, and that is like contaminating evidence in a way.
Because DNA can really only answer the question of who, not how. With the Phantom, Lucas, Amanda, and who knows how many other cases, the DNA never lied. We just didn't ask the right questions. Stay curious.
Science is so interesting.
Happy Earth Month!
All right, yeah, that was a crazy video. Yeah, hope we never get framed out here. I'll catch you guys on the next one.